Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and curses are back in Innistrad Midnight Hunt. But where did curses get their start? What have we learned from all the different iterations? And what can you expect the newest curses to be like in Innistrad Midnight Hunt? Well, let's dig in today. Let's dial it all the way back to original Innistrad design. Innistrad had been settled on as a gothic horror set. So in the very first design meeting, Mark Rosewater asked his team to do a simple exercise. Get every single horror trope they could think of written on a whiteboard. So of course we got a lot of the creature types you see, vampires and werewolves and zombies, and we got a number of tropes you see from media, like the creepy doll that follows you, the unruly mob of people, and the wooden stake to pierce a vampire's heart. But one that made it into the initial batch as a key repeating trope was curses. The design team knew they wanted to do curses, but how? Curses stuck around. They weren't a sorcery or an instant, and curses should impact the person they were cast upon. They looked for inspiration and found Unglued? Unglued had two cards that enchanted a player that caused them some kind of trouble. Charm School and Volrath's Motion Sensor. You literally gave to your opponent and then they impeded their game actions. Now at the time, enchant players in Black Border Magic were barely a thing. There was Psychic Possession, Paradox Haze, and Wheel of Sun and Moon, and none of them particularly caused a bad thing to happen to your opponent. But what if they did? And through this, the idea of curses was born. Enchant players that caused some kind of negative effect to the person affected by the curse. It was a perfect flavor hit. Though notably, they were left enchant players rather than enchant opponent, because it's nice when you find the situation where you want to enchant yourself, like using Curse of the Bloody Tome to turbo mill your own library. All in all, Innistrad had 6 different curses, plus Bitterheart Witch, which could find them. A fun fact, by the way, is that at the time, to justify having a subtype, you needed a card that would make that subtype matter. That's why, for example, in original Zendikar, which had trap cards that let you play them under cheap conditions, if your opponent activated your trap card, you have Trap Finder's Trick and Trap Maker's Snare. Neither is particularly strong, but they give a reason for the subtype to exist. These days, I think would be willing to do one just for flavor on a batch of cards if we needed to. Though often, if we're doing something in that quantity, we'd want some card that makes it matter anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. Anyway, Dark Ascension then followed up with 5 more curses, including 2 more Curses Matters cards, in Curse of Misfortunes and Curse of Thirst. And so the sets came out, and curses were received all right. They were flavor wins, and definitely felt right, but understandably, being enchanted by a negative card like that could be frustrating, especially if you were playing a deck packing no enchantment removal. The key is using them in just the right place, at just the right quantities. And with only 11 in existence, with many at higher rarities, it was just about right. So for our next go around of curses, we tried something new. In Commander 2013, we did 5 new curses, 1 per color, that were all commander sized. The idea here is we could make them multiplayer cards. You would put them on someone and then encourage people to attack them. Also, notably, Curse of Predation made for the first ever green curse. A lot of these ended up on the weaker side. For one, some of the designs were weak, poor Curse of the Forsaken. But also a problem with them is that they were more likely to benefit an opponent than they were you. In a 4-player commander game, 2 other players get to benefit from a curse without you reaping any rewards. Curse of Predation is especially brutal because it grew your enemy's creatures so they could eventually turn around and attack you with them. It was a totally solid experiment to run, and they were decently popular, but we definitely had some learning lessons to take away from them. And hold that thought, more on commander curses in just a moment. But first, Shadows over Innistrad. Shadows over Innistrad was entirely absent of curses, save for the Accursed Witch, Infectious Curse, double-sided card as a nod back to the mechanic. They had a mixed enough reaction so far, and we needed the space in the set to play up some more of the mystery angle the block was focusing on. Of course, after releasing it, the feedback poured in from players that they were sad curses were missing. Well, file that one away for next Innistrad. But first, we had Amonkhet, another tropey setting and another place where curse was written on the whiteboard and circled with a red marker. Mummies and curses go hand in hand as far as tropes go, and fortunately, this time, we felt pretty good about just reaching back and grabbing this mechanic, especially since Shadows over Innistrad didn't really take it. 5 new curses showed up in the block, just enough to get a little of that Egyptian curse flavor rolling. Okay, now let's get back to Commander. I want to talk about Commander 2017. When I handed the set off from design to development, there was another cycle in there. Since Commander 2017 was tribal focused, I had made a cycle of uncommon creatures that each had 2 of the 4 dex creature types to bridge the gap, like a cat wizard or vampire dragon. Brian Hawley, the set's final designer, identified that there was some trouble getting each creature design right for 2 different decks, and also noted that the decks didn't really have a lot for people who weren't excited about tribal. Usually, if we're releasing something which is very heavily about one theme, we like to make sure there's something which deliberately is interesting to people who might not like that theme. And in this case, Brian added a cycle of cards which would eventually become curses, again, 1 for each color. As an aside, you'll note that Bloodline Necromancer, one of the double creature type cards, did make it through to the final version as the 6th uncommon. Oh, and we all just agreed that cat dragons were too cool to not make, so we just made Wasatora anyway. But I digress, back to curses. Anyway, these 5 curses ended up a lot more interesting. Learning from the challenges of the C13 ones, the twist here was that this time, the attacking player and the curse's owner got the benefit. So you no longer had the problem of the other players getting double the advantage out of the curse that you did. A great solve for this design challenge. And the power level on some of them also hit. Curse of Verbosity and especially Curse of Opulence see a decent amount of commander play to this day. I'd also be remiss if I didn't talk about the unlucky character featured on all 5 of these curses, and then also as an Easter egg on Flame Blitz in Modern Horizons 2. Poor guy. The unluckiest, as he's been called, has become a popular fan request to make someday. Definitely something on my radar. Anyway, how did these do? Well, on the whole, after trying 2 cycles of these attack curses, I'm pretty lukewarm on them. I really like how they keep the game rolling and wanting to attack, like how Monarch does. The problem is that the play pattern becomes an issue over time. Telling everybody to constantly attack the same player puts that player in a pretty bad spot. And while the noble use of the card is targeting the strongest player to try and incentivize players to attack them, too often I see the player who is behind be targeted by one of these, and then people gang up on them to pummel them even further. In general, feeling like the table has turned against you when it's not your fault isn't a great feeling, and there are a lot of times where a player casts a turn 1 Curse of Opulence on someone else, and that player just knows they're going to get attacked a bunch of extra times this game. I like curses in Commander, but these attacking ones, I'm not super keen on. But what do you think about these attack curses? Let me know in the comments down below. Given what we learned from that batch of curses, it's probably no surprise to you that the next 2 curses we see are in commander decks and are not about attacking a player, with Curse of Fool's Wisdom in Commander 2019 and Maddening Hex in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms Commander. Both of these hurt your opponents like the curses they are, but don't inspire other players to gang up on them. Much more of the ideal effect. All of this brings us up to Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Curses are back on the Innistrad menu by popular demand, and we're taking all of these lessons to roll up into what we're doing here. There are new curses in the main set and in the commander cards. You'll notice a few things. First, the ones in the main set, like Curse of Shaken Faith and Curse of Silence, are at higher rarities, and there's just a small smattering of them. Enough to create that vibe for the players who want them, but not so many that they're going to make people frustrated by getting cursed all the time. And on the commander front, we took all those previous lessons into account too. Curse of Obsession, a commander targeted curse, doesn't tell people to gang up on the player it's enchanting. It just does something negative to them. You'll also notice that you may want to enchant yourself sometime with it, which is actually true of all the ones you'll see in the commander decks this time around. And yes, that means there are more. Corey Bowen's idea with these was to make them curses you'd sometimes want to put on yourself. What are the others and how many are there? Well, you'll just have to wait and see on September 13th. Ooh, spooky. When Commander Versus and the Command Zone reveal the two decks. And finally, I would feel like I would be missing something on my curse overview if I didn't mention Curse of the Fire Penguin from Unhinged, which I will leave on the screen and vamp for a few seconds to see if you can figure out what it does, despite the fact that it looks completely nonsensical and you'll probably have to pause this video to have any chance. And also, for Gavin's, well actually, I made this Mystery Booster playtest card of the week, Celestine Cave Witch, which creates curse tokens that you give your opponents. So, what do you think about curses? Do you wish there were more, less, and did you manage to figure out Curse of the Fire Penguin? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll talk with you again soon, and in the meantime, may you cast curses and not get cursed yourself. You got this. Okay, all of that down? Good. Now let's go to the packs. Let's start with draft boosters. Of what we've talked about today, draft boosters can have the showcase or borderless versions of cards. So that means it's possible to open up Eternal Night Legends, Equinox Frame, and borderless Planeswalkers here. These treatments show up here about a third of